Hey everyone, me Kevin here. There is a shocking potential that could come as a result of the Trump tariffs, and very few people are talking about this. It may not happen, but I think it is in your best interest to consider this perspective, especially if you are a business operator. And if you're an investor, you'd like to know as well. So here's the thesis. The thesis is, and this isn't me taking sides, I'm not trying to be political, okay? This is just a thesis. Let's talk about it. All right, let's get into it. So first, a lot of companies right now are announcing these massive new investments into America, but there's a common denominator between all of them. All of the projects are announcing this 4 to 5 year time frame. We've got the OpenAI partnership, we've got the Apple investments, multiple other announcements that almost get made on a daily basis by these powerhouse companies about how they're going to invest so much more money into Make America Great Again. What's the common denominator there? They're not spending it right now. Saying, yeah, we'll do it over the next 4 years. Which, what does that afford? Well, first, it gives Donald Trump a win. Look, hundreds of billions of dollars getting announced to come to America. Make America great again. Fantastic. Everyone's happy. It looks like Trump is doing what he's saying. The companies, on the other hand, are in the good graces of Trump. Hey, Trump, these tariffs are loony. Remember, we're investing $500 billion over the next X number of years. We're in this with you. We want to make America great again as well. By the way, these tariffs suck. Okay? So what's the point of this? The point of this is there is a possibility that a lot of these companies are saying whatever they need to give Trump the impression that he's winning. And what they're really doing is manipulating the Trump administration into believing they've secured all of these investments to leverage clout over Trump, to get tariffs to go away, to go back to a world of free trade. And then guess what happens? This is the punch. Anyone who actually went all in on a new unsubsidized factory or, some form of industrial plant in America ends up screwed. Why? Because if you go back to a future of free trade and the tariffs go away, you're back to square one, which is competing with China, competing with Indonesia, Taiwan, and all of the other countries. Now, it's possible we never go back to free trade. I think that is impossible. Now, this is my opinion, but based on the research that I'm doing, I suspect that within the next 2 years, Donald Trump will announce some form of grand free trade agreement. That means anybody who's started building, an aluminum fab, let's say, in America has just wasted their money. And the downside of that is they won't be competitive unless there are government grants to make them competitive. It's actually why you saw TSMC come to America, not because it was cheaper to build in America, but it was cheaper to build in America with Biden bucks. Now, what implications does this have? Well, if Donald Trump does not go back to free trade, here's the other thing. He might not. He might hold on. But if he holds on, we'll probably end up seeing a recession. Well, what is a recession going to do? Well, if it's a short-term detox 6-month recession, maybe nothing. But if it ends up being a long-term lost generation of investment opportunity recession, people are going to be pissed. And the Democrats will finally find a non-loony Democrat, and they'll win in 2028. If that happens, or in that case, when that happens, what's the first thing they're going to do? Well, the first thing is you will lose tariffs and you'll go right back to free trade within the first 6 months of the next administration. So either Trump within the next 2 years probably brings us to free trade, or the next administration 4 years from now, in a few months, brings us to free trade. Now, forgive me, I'm just walking to my car from the hospital because Max is in the pediatric ICU. Hopefully he'll be out of here tomorrow. He's finally clinically better, but yeah, pretty sick there. So oxygen got down to like 79% for a moment. We're like, oh, this kid's going hypoxic. Maybe we should call a doctor. We did. Anyway, so Love the Cybertruck, by the way. I always have to check now every time I get to it. Like, did I get graffitied yet? Honestly, if you read Twitter, you feel like you're going to get graffitied every day, but it hasn't happened yet. So, good. It's a great car. So, all right, here's the thing. Let's think about this practically for a moment. If you are Apple, are you really going to invest $500 million into plants in the United States because of all these tariffs? And then all of a sudden they go away and it's cheaper to have just built it in India because you have an administration that is now back to free trade and you don't have the incentives. So now all of a sudden you're paying $35 for labor per hour where you could be getting it for $3 an hour. Now, I'm not saying that is good. That, yes, the American worker suffers with that. The American consumer benefits through the form of lower prices and basically innovative deflation through and globalism deflation, right? Innovation leads to deflation and globalism currently leads to deflation, but that's really because, think about it. If all of us on average make $40 an hour, we walk into a room, great. And let's say there are 100 of us. If we then walk into a room where there are 100, people from India, Indian workers, and they have an average wage of $3 an hour, well, and we walk into that room and now we have 200 people, half of them with an average of $3 an hour, half of them with an average of $40 an hour, or whatever we're making, the average wage of that room is going to plummet. Who benefits from that is the global consumer. So in other words, the thesis here, the opinion is that a return to free trade is inevitable. It will either happen under the Trump administration or it will happen under the next administration. Either way, I believe and I agree that history tells us we will almost always return to free trade. This is what we have seen time and time again in the 1930s. We saw it in the 1970s. We'll see it again. At some point in the future, we will return to free trade. If that is the conclusion, if the answer is we will be returning to free trade at some point in the future, why would you actually build a $500 million facility in America? You probably wouldn't, because the moment you finished it and we went back to free trade, I'm sitting on ants, you'd be right back in a disadvantageous position. Now you just invested all of this money into an area where, congratulations, you open up shop, and now you have a horrible opportunity to compete on a global scale again because everybody's competing with free trade and you could have had lower wages somewhere else. I believe that companies realize this, and that's why they're doing whatever they can to talk big about these 4-year plans now, realizing that they are not actually liars if they do nothing for the next 2 years and just wait, because they said 4 years, we're just spending the first 2 years planning, bro. Then you get to midterms, who knows? The uncertainty is resolved by waiting. Companies know that. And so that's an interesting conclusion there. And it's something that we look at as, we look at this in the housing market as well. So we have the non-accredited raise for House Hack, but I want you to think about this with the housing market. We look at markets that are structurally and always going to be underbuilt. That's where we like investing because that's where we can make our investors money. And when we IPO in the future, we hope we can institutionalize what we're doing and it's big dollars for everybody involved. Okay, that's the goal. I'm biased, obviously. Househack.com. But the point is, some things don't change. You could have a politician say they're going to change things and they're going to change the rules and they're going to make things temporarily different. Fine. Then you just wait for it all to return to the mean. The same thing that's true in housing, I believe, will also end up being true in manufacturing. Do I really think we're going to manufacture aluminum in the United States? Is that the best use of Americans' talent? Do I really believe that the UAW saying tariffs are great for Americans is truly great for Americans? Or is it great for auto worker union dues, who represent about 400,000 workers out of the 154 million workers in the country? In other words, less than 1%. So I hate to say it, but this may be a very unpopular opinion because this implies that somehow, oh, I'm anti-Trump. I'm anti-tariff. I think tariffs are a stupid idea. If you want to use them to negotiate, that's fine. But I actually think he's just doing this to try to get to free trade again. And then when we get back to free trade, well, now we don't have tariff-induced inflation, and oh my gosh, rates can come down, and you accomplish everything. So then you accomplish lower inflation, lower rates, and hopefully an economy that hasn't yet gone into recession. But we will return to free trade. And companies know that, and they don't want to be left building infrastructure in one of the most expensive places in the world, probably outside of like Europe or the United Kingdom, to manufacture. Why? If you're not going to get incentivized. The only reason we were really seeing manufacturing come back to the United States, and I'm not here to shill Biden by any means, but things like the Inflation Reduction Act, incentivizing manufacturing in the United States was an instantaneous transformation for business. Enphase, as an example, was manufacturing in Romania because it was cheaper to manufacture inverters in Romania. Inflation Reduction Act comes around, they're like, oh my gosh, guess what we're doing now? We're manufacturing in America. Well, if the Inflation Reduction Act goes away, guess what they're going to go back to? Going back to Romania. And then people are like, oh, but then you'll go to tariffs. Fine. We might go to tariffs for the short term. You go to tariffs for the short term, you create economic pain, you create lower growth, you create this talk about investment, and then it never actually happens. And then guess what? You end up back at free trade anyway. Now, best case scenario, we see a reduction of retaliatory tariffs, right? This is actually a very interesting thesis that you could use. Oh, I think I'm getting allergies out here. Loser. Anyway, there's this idea that you could actually use these negotiations to reduce the tariffs that have been implemented against the United States. So again, it ends up being just a leverage argument. But even in that case, if you go into a reduction of tariffs, so like the inverse of retaliatory tariffs, like everybody together going to free trade, then what you end up with, is free trade. So we will revert to the mean. We will revert to free trade. That's my opinion. That's my thesis. I could be wrong. That's why I'm putting opinion in this title, because I don't want people to think that, I'm telling you this is exactly what's going to happen. I'm telling you what I think is going to happen. And I think, maybe you could leave a comment down below on this. I don't know if these sort of videos are going to be interesting to people. Do people just sort of only want the news, or do you actually also want my opinion? Hence, again, why I'm putting opinion in the title, to isolate to people who might be interested in that. But think about the long-term investing implications of this. Well, if we go back to free trade, we go back to growth, in my opinion. You remove uncertainty, and in the long term, we won't have an inflation issue. You'll have a disinflation issue. You'll be right back to the money printer turning on, which when the money printer turns back on, what do you want? You want assets. It could be anything. It could be Bitcoin, it could be gold, or it could be real estate, it could be stocks, because they preserve your purchasing power in the face of inflation. Now, even though we might not have inflation, I don't think we're going to have high inflation, the money printer will be on. So technically what we're doing is we're just fighting deflation, because we should be seeing deflation in our numbers in a capitalistic economy, but we don't, because we print too much. So kind of funny, but point of all of that is be cautious of these announcements, meaning anything for our GDP in the meantime, in the near term, and wait for that. Like, we go back to free trade and avoid a recession, your boy Kevin's back to buying the dip.